order. Good afternoon, everyone. I hope everyone had a great Thanksgiving. And welcome back. Meeting number 7 of the Standing Committee on International Trade, pursuant to Standing Order 1082 and the motion adopted by the committee on Thursday, September 18th. The committee is resuming its study of Canada and the forthcoming CUSMA review. We have with us today as an individual by video conference Barry Appleton, a professor, and from Unifor, Lana Payne, National President, and Angelo Di Caro, Director, Research Department, and from the Canadian Shield Institute, Vas Bedar, Managing Director. Welcome to you all. We will start with opening remarks. Mr. Appleton, opening remarks of up to 5 minutes, please. You're on mute, Mr. Appleton. Mr. Appleton, please unmute yourself.
He's not on mute. There's a tech issue.
Got it.
Can you hear me now?
Okay,
Madam Chair?
That's right.
Yes, I'm sorry.
No, I don't think it was your problem. I think it was on the other end. So please go ahead.
Excellent. Well, don't take it from my time. That's all I can say. Good afternoon, Madam Chair and members of the committee. I'm Professor Barry Appleton. I'm a trade law expert and professor of international law. I'm the co-director and distinguished senior fellow at the Center for International Law at the New York Law School, as well as a scholar and fellow at the Balsillie School of International Affairs in Waterloo, Ontario. I'm also the managing partner of Appleton Associates International Lawyers, LP, in Toronto. I've advised the Ontario Cabinet Committee on North American Free Trade during the initial negotiations of the NAFTA. I've written 2 books on the NAFTA and guided governments on international trade and economic issues over the years. I've also given oral and written testimony to U.S. executive agencies twice this year on trade and plan to do so yet again before the year's end. Now, I appear before you today to address a critical vulnerability in Canada's preparation for the CUSMA review. This is not a routine administrative exercise, but a decisive moment for Canada's economic and digital sovereignty. The U.S. strategy was never hidden. In 2020, Jared Kushner explained that CUSMA's sunset clause was deliberately designed to provide Washington with recurring leverage. It was a 16-year lease, in his words, not a permanent partnership. The full quote is in my brief, and I've had it fully translated for you. Mr. Kushner said, "Why lock in today's market rates if you'll be able to charge more in the future?" And he concluded by saying, "The shortening duration gives leverage to the stronger party, which, given the relative sizes of our economies, likely will always be the United States." This was in 2020, so this is some 5 years ago. Canada, in my view, has been playing the wrong game. Canada must now respond with foresight, not with improvisation. CUSMA, in essence, is a 16-year lease. It's not a permanent treaty. The agreement was designed with a review cycle that advantageously shortens time horizons. Under CUSMA Article 34, any party may terminate the agreement on 6 months' notice. And the 6-month review cycles lock Canada into uncertainty, and a 6-month cancellation clause is key. This is leverage by design. So Canada has an institutional disadvantage. Canada enters this review with a structural deficiency in advisory intelligence. The U.S. maintains 15 industry trade committees, ITACs, that provide security-cleared, sector-specific advice with direct access to negotiating texts, comparable to mechanisms in other trade partners of ours, the EU, the UK, France, and Australia. Canada once had parallel capacity through the SAGITs, the Sectoral Advisory Groups on International Trade. That machinery was dismantled by various governments over the last 20 years. We now rely on ad hoc consultations that are transparent yet insufficiently technical, confidential, or continuous. Digital sovereignty is my second point. It's inseparable from trade policy. After tariffs, the decisive contest is digital. Silicon Valley declared victory in CUSMA, and they're ready to do so in round 2. CUSMA's digital chapter constrains Canada's authority over cross-border data flows, data localization, and access to source code and algorithms. In practice, this narrows Parliament's parliamentary space to govern platforms and cloud infrastructure that increasingly shape our economy and our democracy. So what should Canada do? I'll give you 3 suggestions. First, We need to rebuild foresight capacity, reestablish a legislative advisory system, a Canadian Trade and Economic Security Council supported by modern statutes, with classified access, continuous engagement, and balanced representation across industry, labor, Indigenous government, civil society, provinces, and security agencies. I wrote a recent paper, and this is referenced in the brief I filed with the committee today. I also note that the Balsillie School of International Affairs in Waterloo has been partnering with think tanks and public policy schools across Canada to create a supportive trade advisory sectoral secretariat, and you can ask me about that in questions if you're interested. 2, adopt a whole-of-government strategy. Appoint a trade czar and an innovation czar. Their function would be to coordinate a whole-of-government response and to work with provinces, industry, and civil society. We need to take bold action to link economic security, technological governance, and industrial strategy with trade. And third, legislate a digital sovereignty framework, ensure statutory authority to govern algorithms, data, and cloud. I've referenced a paper in my brief on this. I think this is an essential priority. Foundationally, Parliament faces a defining choice: build strategic capacity or keep improvising from weakness. Trade policy without intelligence is guesswork. So the window's closing, but it's not over. I hope that I've given you something to think about, and perhaps we'll have an opportunity to talk about this in questions. Thank you, Madam Chair, for the time.
Thank you very much, Mr. Appleton. On to Ms. Payne. Welcome back to our committee. Didn't expect you back here quite so quickly, but we're glad to have you.
Yes, it's very good to be here, and thanks for having me, Madam Chair and members of the committee. And I would say that I agree with the professor's comments. We're in an economic war, and we need an economic war room, and that's what he's referring to. As you know, I'm Lana Payne, and I'm the national president of Unifor, Canada's largest private sector union, representing 320,000 workers across this country, including about 1/3 who work in trade-exposed areas of the economy. 9 months into this unprecedented trade war, and I would say to you, I'm here to remind you again that Canada's industrial economy is at risk. And I don't say that lightly. I see it every day in the faces of our members, in the layoff notices that they receive, and in the plant insecurity that they face. It's at risk despite CUSMA, a trade agreement at the moment almost in name only. Last week, as you all know, disaster struck auto workers in Ontario. After months and months of false assurances and delay, global automaker Stellantis announced plans to relocate vehicle assembly slated and negotiated by our union for Brampton, a 3,000-worker facility, to the United States. Thousands more are now facing job loss as well in the supply chain. This is the latest blow to Canada's 100-year-strong auto sector. It follows plans announced by General Motors to move some of its truck production from Oshawa to Indiana in early 2026. All of these moves being designed to appease Donald Trump with our jobs. If we allow these corporations to shift production to the United States without applying equal pressure to keep production in Canada, the jobs will go. We must play hardball, and we can, because we have the tools and the leverage to do so. It compounds pressures facing the auto supply industry, the aluminum and steel industry, and the forestry industry, which is dealing with crushing softwood lumber duties and more recently 232 tariffs from the Trump administration. Trump's attacks on Canadian industries are happening despite commitments made in writing to the contrary. A bilateral CUSMA trade side deal granting Canadian cars and parts reprieve from these Section 232 tariffs, for instance, has been totally ignored by the Trump administration. A side letter that they signed, I might add. I raise this example because it begs the question: if Trump's end goal here is to dismantle Canada's industrial sector, what exactly is CUSMA for? Unifor understands that, at least for now, CUSMA compliance provides a tariff shield for many Canadian exports to the United States. However, as Trump imposes national security tariffs on more and more and more sectors, the shield is greatly weakened. We should not condition ourselves into thinking that having the best of a slew of bad deals with the United States is somehow good. This would be a mistake and will lead to more lost investment and jobs in our country. It's why our position as a union has been that we must be willing to use Canada's considerable leverage to fight back. What angers me, and should anger all of you, is a campaign waged right now by Bay Street to secure CUSMA's survival, no matter the cost to our most important industrial sectors. We cannot fall into the trap of thinking that CUSMA is guarding the economy against tariffs, because it is not, and the last 9 months should teach us that it is not. It is Trump, through his executive orders, that created the carve-out for CUSMA, and he can remove this at any time. I think we can agree that the U.S. President telegraphs his moves by short-term thinking, self-interest, and gaining the upper hand, and of course, furthering his own leverage. In what scenario, then, must the U.S. offer a full-on endorsement of CUSMA next summer? Will they? We must ask ourselves that. In fact, the scenario is very real that we may face more extortion and more losses to our industrial economy. It's possible that Trump even triggers CUSMA's 6-month termination clause. It's also possible that the U.S. opts not to renew CUSMA in July, starting a 10-year countdown clock to the deal's elimination. We need to be honest with ourselves about what our priorities must be. We must work towards a new CUSMA deal that better regulates trade, but not a deal at any cost, not a deal that sacrifices the industrial economy of our country. We don't need a trade deal that's right for Bay Street. We need a trade relationship that's right for working people. Formulating a CUSMA strategy means a full-scale defense of our industrial economy, and in that, workers' rights. It involves Canada communicating red lines in key industrial sectors. It means telling folks like Howard Lutnick that no, our auto industry is not yours to take. And yes, America does need our resources. It does need our aluminum. It does need our energy, and it does need our lumber. Canada has great leverage, including in strategic resources like aluminum, energy, and potash. We shouldn't strike deals that give the U.S. unconditional access to these resources. And if the right CUSMA deal isn't to be had, then we have to prepare ourselves to reject its renewal ourselves. Yes, we will also need to make bold plays, because that is what you do during negotiations. We have to ask what's truly important for this country: building things that add value or serving as a storehouse of resources for the United States. Which side are we indeed on? And I think we can all agree that we must be on the side of working people here. Thank you very much, and happy to answer any questions.
Thank you very much, Ms. Payne. Ms. Vidar, please, for up to 5 minutes.
Thank you, Madam Chair and members of the committee. Thank you also, Lana, for your remarks, and to Barry. My name is Vas Bednar. I'm the Managing Director of the Canadian Shield Institute for Public Policy, a new policy studio that's focused on strengthening Canada's economic sovereignty, right? So our ability to produce, to govern, and to know on our own terms. Incidentally, I'm also co-author of The Big Fix, How Companies Capture Markets and Harm Canadians, which means I'm always happy to talk about policy as market craft, because that's what public policy does, right? It helps us to govern markets. And the framing that I'd like to offer the committee today is that sovereignty begins with freedom of thought. Trade policy isn't just about goods and tariffs anymore. It's about the governance of knowledge. When we have situations where algorithms are determining prices, foreign firms host our data, and proprietary software mediates communication and consumption, the question for us becomes whose systems are shaping how we know decide, and compete. That's epistemic sovereignty, the freedom of thought in a digital economy. And it's the right of a country and its citizens to maintain its own cognitive and regulatory independence, to be able to audit, to verify, and understand the tools and information structures that govern citizens and markets. And at present, as I believe you know, Canada has little of it. Why is that? Partially that's because legacy trade rules now limit our ability to think and govern freely. CUSMA and similar trade agreements were drafted just maybe before this reality really set in for Canada. As Barry emphasized, the digital trade chapter locks in cross-border data flows and prohibits data residency mandates. This prevents governments like ours from requiring access to source code or algorithmic logic. They even bar duties on electronic transmissions, blocking the fiscal tools needed to tax digital services fairly. These clauses are technical. They have profound constitutional effects. They mean that Canada cannot fully investigate, audit, or even understand the algorithmic systems shaping our markets and public sphere without potentially violating trade rules. We have effectively ceded this right to know, and that increasingly translates into the right to self-govern. That's the opposite of epistemic sovereignty. And this next CUSMA review, to the extent that we'll truly and fully have one, is a real chance to reclaim that policy space. Canada should treat the digital trade chapter as a foundational element of our future. We must secure clear, unambiguous language within any new agreement, text specifically in the core articles or reservations that explicitly preserves Canada's unqualified right to engage in policies that promote and secure national security and personal data protection, algorithmic transparency and auditability, and domestic authority over sovereign digital infrastructure from cloud compute to AI oversight. These are the conditions for trust, security, and fair competition. But our exposure runs a little deeper than regulation. You know, Canada's communications and payments, other systems, our stacks rely on U.S. infrastructure providers at nearly every layer, verification, hosting, and transaction networks alike. These interdependencies create a kind of soft capture. Canada's technically independent, but operationally dependent, right? Maybe we're independent on paper. I think we saw that with the outage this morning. The goal should be governable interdependence. We need the ability to act, innovate, and secure ourselves within one coherent, lawful Canadian economy. Something else, as we think about what Canada can do from a policy perspective that's complementary to the trade review, other than me getting like an exercise band for my glasses when I look down, is that we should amend Canada's Income Tax Act to broaden the definition of permanent establishment. Right? That would mean that it would apply to situations where an entity has a significant digital presence, thus establishing the necessary tax nexus that we still don't have. I'll echo Barry and say, yeah, we also need to rebuild trade intelligence and epistemic capacity. The last time we faced a major trade reset during FTA and NAFTA, we built the SAGITs, right? And they had a lot of merit. They gave policymakers structured access to expertise across industries, labor, and academe. We do need that kind of infrastructure again, but for the digital era. A modern SAGIT system could integrate technologists, academic experts, economists, ensuring that Canada negotiates from a position of knowledge sovereignty and not asymmetry. And as many have argued, Canada desperately needs a modernized National Economic Council, an institutional home for long-term, cross-sector strategy that restores our capacity to think and act for ourselves in a 21st century economy. Otherwise, we're going to keep importing foreign assumptions about how our markets should work. I'll wrap by saying the sovereignty fights of our past, and you know, Canada has a very interesting history and important history with this word. They tended to be about borders, right, or factories, but the sovereignty fight of our future is about freedom of thought, that right to design, to regulate, and understand these systems that are governing our everyday lives. And this review is a chance to restore and reassert Canada's epistemic and economic sovereignty to ensure that in the digital age, we remain the authors of our rules. Thank you. I look forward to the discussion, and I'll be making a more fulsome brief to the committee.
Thank you very much. We will go now to our members. We will go to our new father that we have at the table. Mr. Mantle, congratulations from all of us as a committee on your first baby girl.
Lots of makeup to hide the
I
hide the
suspect
bags.
when you come to committee, you'll have to take this little bit of time to rest a little bit. Probably won't get much else.
No, there's too much to do for the next generation, Madam Chair. Thank you all for the kind congratulations. My questions are initially to you, Mr. Appleton. You described Canada's current approach as, quote, the delusional belief that good intentions and polite dialogue will somehow protect our daily trading relationship. Is the current government's approach based on hopium?
Thank you for your question. It's sometimes difficult to get outside the wonderful things that you write in your op-eds. Yes, I worry about hopium, the belief that we're playing a game that we can deal with, just like I hope for the Blue Jays, but I just don't know. But the Blue Jays have a better chance right now than we do in trade. And the reason is we're playing the wrong game. We're playing a game where we believe that the Americans are going to follow the rules that we've worked on with them for so many years and built. We've built something together. But no longer do we have trade monogamy. We have something that's transactional, and this is whatever is good as last night. That's what's going on, and there's no marital therapy. We have no disputes resolution. We have no way of making this work. And so we need to really rethink this. And the one difference I have with Ms. Payne, and only one that I want to point out, is that Article 34 doesn't mean that we have to wait to the end of the CUSMA review for CUSMA to be ended. CUSMA could end at any point. The president can end it. Now, there are some constitutional issues that I've been having discussions with my constitutional colleagues at the New York Law School on as to whether or not it's appropriate for the president to do it. But the president ended the treaty with India without going to Congress, and I suspect he would end the treaty with Canada also without going to Congress. And maybe we go to the courts, but we would be stuck with 6 months or no treaty. And so I don't think we're prepared. And that's what I worry about. And then I've given specific suggestions in my brief and in other writings as to what we can do to do better, because I am an optimist. I think we can do better, and I think this committee can make a big difference. That's why I'm here.
Thank you, Mr. Appleton. And picking up on some of your further writings, you described Canadian negotiators arriving with fragmented notes while American negotiators arrive with sharpened strategies. Now, in fairness to our negotiators, you do explain in some of your writings that this is the result of 10 years of not having sufficient institutional capacity. And if I can summarize your approach under the current government, you said it lacks routine, structured, and ongoing engagement. It has slower responses, fragmented input, gaps in practical knowledge, so that, quote, U.S. negotiators consistently entered the room with more substantial leverage, and that leaves critical gaps in our negotiating preparedness. So, Mr. Appleton, given that, is it your view that Canada, under the current approach, is unprepared for the CUSMA review?
Simply, yes, we are unprepared. And the reason is we're tying one arm or two arms behind our back. The Americans have 1,000 people in these ITACs available, waiting for them, able to advise on drafts as they go along, to give real, meaningful, committed types of focused information. We gave that up over 20 years ago. And that is not what we need to do to be prepared. And I know that public policy schools across this country, working with the Balsillie School, are trying to create a capacity building right now to be able to help give us that. But the government has to take the offer. We can give a hand out, but they have to give their hand back if they want to do this. I don't know why we would not be doing that. I don't know why we'd walk in with less precise information, less capacity. And that is exactly the way to failure, and we can't let that happen if we want to succeed in the incoming negotiations.
Ms. Bendar, a question to you in a similar vein. In your writings, you've suggested that our current consultation approach is being co-opted by companies who, although appear Canadian, are in fact foreign because they are located elsewhere. Their CEOs are beholden to other jurisdictions, and you describe it as an untrustworthy approach. So, question to you, is it your view that the current government's approach to the CUSMA consultation is untrustworthy?
It's not my position that the current approach is untrustworthy, but I think we're in a new paradigm where we have to kind of take that advice with the grain of salt that it deserves. I resent and feel annoyed by the fact that large foreign multinationals, and not just the largest companies in the United States of America, the largest companies in the world, can be shielded by certain councils and advisory groups that they embed themselves in while they're also doing their own lobbying. And I worry that a form of capture happens where these groups aren't able to reflect Canada's best interests, but are diluted by those other voices that are running a full court press on us.
Thanks. Thank you. One last question to Ms. Payne. You raised the issue of our economic industrial capacity at risk, and you of course mentioned the issue with Stellantis that has arisen. Is Unifor aware of whether the government has received from Stellantis any commitment to maintaining jobs in Canada for the billions of dollars that it provided that company?
Yeah, I mean, I was part of an effort to try and get investment in the auto industry during that time, and our push was that there needed to be attachments, strings attached, obviously, to subsidies or support to attract that investment, and that those strings attached were jobs.
Are you aware of that commitment or not?
Which is why I haven't seen the written contracts, no. Like you, nobody has seen them. But what I will say to you is that we were very clear that in the government's negotiation with Stellantis at that time, that they needed to make sure that they were fighting to have jobs attached to those commitments. And I believe you've seen Minister Jolie's letter that she wrote Stellantis last week, which is exactly the kind of response that we need right now from our government, is to push back hard against corporations who think in this moment that they can shift production south of the border, and to use every lever we have, including the fact that they received government funding in order to support Brampton and Windsor and the battery plant, and to leverage that to make sure we're keeping production and jobs in Canada. So more of that, please.
Thank you, Ms. Payne. Yes, Madame Lapointe, please, for 6 minutes.
Merci beaucoup, Madame la Présidente. Bienvenue aux témoins.
Thank you very much, Madam Chair, and welcome to our witnesses. It's very interesting. Your opening remarks had really struck me. So I'm turning to Mr. Appleton, first of all. Earlier, you talked about the government strategy and that we need to be very bold, strong. I'd like to hear more from you on that. And also legislated digital trade. Could you tell us some more about those concepts, please? Where is he?
Excuse me. I thank you for your question. First, let's talk for a moment about digital sovereignty, and then I'll talk about bold of what we need to do, because they go together. I think the most important thing I can say about digital sovereignty is that foundationally, a country that does not have a policy, that cannot act, that does not act, to be able to control what we feel, what we act, what we see, is not governing. The foundation of sovereignty is the need to govern. And when we don't do that, either because we have not enacted laws or because we have decided not to enact laws, that area is a vacuum and is taken up by others. And in essence, we become colonized and we lose our rights. And that is very, very problematic. And the interdependence and interconnected we saw today with the outage was a good example. That in Canada, the Canadian companies are affected by American cloud companies, and we are affected by them not only in this way, in this interconnectedness, but also with respect to U.S. laws that govern what goes on with Canadian data. I find that, as a Canadian, very troubling and very problematic. And the problem is that now in the trade negotiation, this has become a very important issue. After tariffs, the focus is trade. If you look at the terms of the fine print of the EU-US deal, 1/4 of the terms are about digital. And we have to be ready for that. And I am afraid that we're not. I've written a paper on this. I've put it in the brief to be able to give it to you. It's called Code Before Clause. We must have our own code, our own approaches before we negotiate the digital ones, or we will find ourselves in terrible, terrible trouble. With respect to a bold strategy, one of the most important things that we can do is to understand that we need to go outside of just the old approaches of government. We need to have not only a whole of government to go outside to work with our provinces, to work with our partners in the innovation community, the business community, the labor community. We must go far outside. And to that, I'm calling for a trade czar, a haut commissionnaire, someone who would be able to bring that together, and one for innovation, an haut commissionnaire aussi for innovation as well. The two things. I'm talking exactly about what Ms. Bednar has been talking about today, that we need to do that. If we are going to succeed, we must understand there's a new game, think about how to deal with that boldly, but we need to have everything going with us inside. We have the capabilities, but we're not using them. That is my greatest concern. And I have spent the last 3 months and the next 3 months not teaching in New York, but working here in Canada to do capacity building inside Canada with anybody who will ask, so that we can build more, do more, and be able to respond better to these very significant threats.
Merci beaucoup, c'est très intéressant.
Thank you very much. That's very interesting. I've also got a question for Madame Payne. For my riding covers the Lower Laurentians, and we had GM Motors of Saint-Thérèse before, and we have Navabus and also PACCAR, and you know that we are impacted by everything that's happening. So you have said we responded well with Madame Jolie's letter. You didn't talk so much about the digital side of things, but do you think we should have Buy Canadian like they're doing with Buy America? Do you have suggestions on that?
Thank you for raising PACCAR. And as you probably are all aware, we received another executive order on Friday night from the United States on Section 232 to deal with heavy-duty trucks and buses. So this has another impact on the broader auto industry, but also on buses and on heavy trucks that we build in Quebec. So the impact of what it is that Donald Trump is doing right now is broadening with every single new Section 232 attack on Canada. And in addition to, yes, buy Canadian, we don't have a choice right now. We have to buy Canadian, we have to build Canadian. We need nation-building projects, but we also need to make sure that if we're building transit in this country, that we're using the manufacturing facilities in Canada to build that transit. We should be building trains in Thunder Bay and not having them go to an American contractor like Siemens. Why would we do that in this moment? And the same thing is true of municipalities across Canada. They must work very hard to make sure that their buses are being built in facilities that we have here in Canada. And there needs to be a coordinated strategy to make that happen. We can't leave any of this to chance. But all of that still will not be enough. There's only so much that we can do through government procurement. We need to also have corporations in Canada acting as patriots as well, and making sure that they also have a buy Canadian approach to what it is that they do and what it is that they're purchasing. We could actually make a very big difference in the short term with this kind of an approach. So we need to do that, of course, but in the meantime, we also have to use leverage to try and make sure that we're protecting our industrial economy in the moment that we're in. And I can tell you that every single day our union is dealing with decisions that have been made at boardroom tables because these corporations are trying to figure out how they mitigate these tariffs at the moment. And they're only feeling pressure from one side, and that's from Donald Trump to shift those jobs south of the border. So we have to do what we can here in Canada using the levers that we have, the tools that we have, to make sure that they're feeling pressure from the other side.
Thank you very much. Mr. Savard-Tremblay, please, for 6 minutes.
Merci, Madame la Présidente. Merci à l'ensemble de vos témoins.
Thank you, Madam Chair, and thank you to all of our witnesses for being here today. Thank you for your presentations. My first question is for Madame Payne. We were listening to Mr. Appleton talking about problems of transparency and consultation. When it comes to the workers you represent, are you feeling the same thing? When it comes to these agreements that have an impact on jobs, if there's someone who needs to be consulted, it should be you, I imagine.
I think that the challenge we have right now is everyone is feeling that they need a place to be able to to help and to be part of what I would call a coordinated Team Canada approach. The structures that the professor was talking about, they have been dismantled over a long period of time. It's not going to be easy to get that kind of a system back together. But what I can say to you is that there's no time like the present to work on it. And where I would start would be in the immediate sectors that are under attack. And those are the 232 sectors: steel, aluminum, auto, forestry, of course, who've just got a most recent one, and now, of course, the heavy-duty truck. These are the priorities. We can do something by bringing everyone together around that, because information is knowledge, and it's important to have that knowledge when you're fighting at a negotiating table. It's a team approach, and we need to do that. So whatever we can do to make sure that people are being consulted and are, you're getting the information in real time is critically important right now. I deal with some of the largest corporations on the planet, many of them operating in the United States. Some of them are now trying to also put pressure on the White House to have a different approach to trade. Knowing what these companies are doing and how that can also help us in our positioning is very important right now. So we do have friends as well south of the border who would like to see, a better trading system. So we need to lean into that.
Est-ce qu'il y a un problème de transparence quand même dans la manière?
Is there a problem of transparency in the way in which this negotiation process is taking place?
What I would say is that, we understand as a union who negotiates that certain parts of negotiations have to occur in certain ways. And that means that there does have to be these kinds of conversations that would happen between our Prime Minister and the President. And yeah, all of Canada can't be in the room when that's going on. But at the same time, there is the support for a negotiating position. And the stronger we can be, in terms of having all of the players being part of that is critically important. And I would say, yes, there is room that we can improve there for sure.
Puis par rapport justement à cet enjeu.
And when it comes to this issue of transparency, in my party, we put forward a bill to accentuation political oversight of these trade deals. First of all, to have a reviewing committee of these agreements and not just looking at things that have already been implemented where we can't really change or amend something. And we also want to have a minimum timeline between when it's actually tabled and adopted, and there shouldn't be any signature without approval of the Parliament. Do you think that these are interesting approaches?
I think right now we're in a different time. And so in a traditional world, I would say to you, we would probably take this approach. But the world is now upside down. And every day we are facing a renewed attack, a renewed threat, a renewed challenge to what it is that we're building in Canada and how our economy is operating. So in that time and in that space, that means we have to be able to react quickly as a country. It also means that at some point in time, I would say to you, we have to understand that there's going to be a line drawn in the sand. And for us as a union, that became last week when Stellantis made the decision that they made. And because we cannot carry on conversation after conversation, negotiation after negotiation, and allow our economy to unravel and to lose production. At some point, we have to say, okay, this is it. Enough is enough. And we're close getting to that point, is what I would say to you right now. We have a lot to protect here. We have hundreds of thousands of workers who are depending on us getting this right. And I would say the focus needs to be on making sure we're getting it right, as opposed to the mechanics of how we deal with it after a deal is done.
Vous me surprenez quand même parce que je crois.
I'm rather surprised by that because I still believe that democracy has its rights, and even if we have to promptly react, we can't just sign blank checks, and all of the interests that are there should be represented. And in a Parliament, all of the elected MPs should have increased scrutiny over the decisions that are to be taken. So I'm rather surprised by your comments on this, because I know that you conduct negotiations, and we can't say everything, but no doubt you would be the first to say that the interests of your members must be represented.
That there wouldn't be a democratic process to deal with things. I just think that we have to recognize in this moment that we may have to make a decision very quickly here. And honestly, it's to a point where I would say I wish people could focus on what it is that I'm having to deal with on a daily basis, and that is people losing their jobs. We have forestry plants and mills that don't know if they're going to survive the month. We have auto jobs being shifted south of the border. This is where I would like Parliament to debate these things. This should be the focus of what our elected MPs are concerned about right now, and that is what Canadians are experiencing, and that's job loss and the anxiety that so many of our members have experienced since February. They go to work every day not knowing if their plant is going to be open next week, sir. That is where I want to see the focus. And yes, if we do get to a point where there is something that is negotiated, that absolutely has to go to Parliament, and there needs to be a review. It needs to be ratified the same way that we ratify collective agreements in many ways. But right now, what I would say is the focus absolutely has to be on what it is that's happening in our economy and what working people are experiencing in this moment.
Thank you very much, Ms. Payne. On to Mr. General, please, for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Madam Chair, and thank you to the witnesses for being here. Mr. DeCaro, Ms. Payne, thank you. You're regulars at the committee. We should get you regular seats here. And then Ms. Bednar and Mr. Appleton. I will start with you, Mr. Appleton, if that's all right. My first question for you was going to be, are we prepared? I think you answered that pretty solidly in some of the other testimony that you gave. But I'll give you the I guess option. Minister LeBlanc was here a few weeks ago, and he was absolutely certain that we were prepared. So I guess that to counter what he said, I give the opportunity to do that. But in addition to that, is it too late for us now? There've been obviously heavy negotiations happening over the last few weeks, and just curious if you can elaborate on some of that.
Well, thank you for your question. Look, Minister LeBlanc has a very difficult job. Having said that, and I've known Minister LeBlanc for, I won't say how many years, many years. I do not believe that we have equipped ourselves to be ready for the intensity, the focus, and the nature of these negotiations. But I believe it's not too late. Look, the best time to plant a tree was 20 years ago. The next best time is today. But it's going to be too late. But the Boy Scouts always say that, be prepared. We're not prepared. And that's where I disagree. I had the opportunity to meet with some of our trade negotiators at the embassy in Washington. They're very able. They're working very hard. They do not have the resources they need. They do not have the capacity they need. As a government, we're not doing it. And there are mistakes along the way. They're not from one government. They're from many governments, but they accumulate. We never thought this type of storm. This is not just a once in a century storm. This has changed foundationally everything that we believed, but we were not ready for it. But my problem is that if you listen to Jared Kushner, and look, in the Middle East, they've been listening to Jared Kushner. He just got the deal. The president listened to Jared Kushner. He told us what this deal was about. He told us the nature of the negotiating tactics that they use, and that's exactly what they used in the Middle East, and it's exactly what they're using with us, and I don't believe we're prepared for that. And so it's very difficult for everybody who's in the 232 sectors. Very, very difficult. But foundationally, what are we going to do when the president decides that he's going to put more leverage on Canada by canceling CUSMA, or just signaling he's going to cancel CUSMA? That's enough. And look at what will happen to the markets, and look at what will happen. We have not made ourselves with enough robustness, enough capacity to be able to deal with that. The good news is, this is like an economic war, and everybody should come to the aid of the country, and we can do that. But right now, I don't think we're ready.
I was prepared to just let you go for the full 5 minutes.
Sorry.
There. No,
I didn't want to eat your time. I'm sorry.
No, that's fair. But I guess so then things like the DST, the digital sales tax, when that's put forward, that sends a wrong message. You would agree? Quick, yes, no.
Yeah, for sure.
Yeah, okay.
Because it was a sign of weakness, and foundationally, the trade provisions on digital trade are not used to propel and aid Canada. They're used to weaken us. That's why it's so important when we think about this. This is the difference of a new economy and these provisions. It used to be that we looked at these provisions to give us more access. They've been giving us less. Yeah. That's why we need to have a policy before we go there and not sign things before we thought about it.
Great. Thanks for that answer. Ms. Bednar had a proposal of the National Economic Council. Was curious to your thoughts weighing in on that. I get a little bit nervous when you say things like the government creating things like trade czars and innovation czars, only because those things seem to never go away and they create lives of themselves, and then we have more and more bureaucracy that generates. So I was curious as your thoughts on the Economic Council, and then if we have time, wouldn't mind Ms. Bednar weighing in on the trade czar and innovation czar piece.
I'll be very quick. The idea is not to add more bureaucracy, but add more capacity at a very specific time. It's like when you call the Coast Guard out. You need them to be able to do search and rescue. You need to deal with it right away, and then they go back. That would be the idea here. We are in a period of national emergency. We need to be able to bring more to bear, to use capacities that are broader and bigger than what we're doing now. And we need the types of people that can bring those skills in. So my idea about an innovation czar is exactly take the types of things that we would use to keep our economy going and think through new strategies. The flip side of the trade czar is to be able to use the types of things, to use those knowledge and idea to get better with that.
Thank you very much. On to Mr. Lavoie, please, for 5 minutes.
Merci, Madame la Présidente. Merci.
Thank you. I've got a first question for Mr. Appleton. Earlier in your presentation, you talked about 3 solutions. And I'd like to come back to these 3 solutions because they went past quickly. You talked about a pan-Canadian government strategy. I'm trying to establish a link between the decision that's been taken by the new government, namely to remove trade barriers between provinces, and that is an important guiding light for the decisions taken by the new government. So is there a link between your first solution, the pan-Canadian government strategy, and the decision that's been taken by the current government?
Mr. Lavoie, I had the privilege of being part of the negotiation team to bring us the agreement on internal trade and was involved in the first case in Canada to actually have internal trade barriers struck down. So I'm a strong believer in reducing internal trade barriers. You can't hear me? There's no translation. I can wait.
It's okay. It's all right now? Continue, Mr. Appleton.
Do I need to repeat what I said before?
At what point did the translation stop?
Dès le début, c'était très très faible.
It was very weak from the beginning.
Mr. Appleton.
I'll try to be as quick as I can, mindful of the time. Mr. Lavoie, I was part of the team that helped negotiate the agreement on internal trade in Canada and brought the first case that struck a trade barrier down against internal trade barriers. So this is very important to me generally, but it's not part of the strategy because foundationally the benefit is of country and important to us as a matter of making our country more efficient. Still, we have a battle on an international trade side, and that's the part that I worry about. And so what I've been focusing on today is
Mr. Appleton, hold on. I'm sorry. Your information is very valuable, and we continue to have a bit of translation. And
check with the members if they can hear.
Can you start to speak again?
From the top?
No. Take the middle and
the middle.
See if we may invite you back another time just because your information is so critical. All right.
Well, I thank you, Madam Chair. I'll do the best I can. What I was saying was that there are significant benefits to Canada as a country to be able to have internal commerce to work in a very significant way. But our battle right now is with the United States. And while that gives us a little bit more innovation and a little bit more in terms of productivity, it doesn't move the needle in the extent that we need to do it. What we need to do is to be able to deal with very significant structural trade dependence. And that's a very big problem because in many ways, it was too good for us for so long that we didn't do the type of innovation that we needed and the type of diversification that we needed to do. But now, not only do we have that, but we're not buying Canadian. I've written a paper on that recently. You can see that on the CG website. You can see that we're not focusing in on the sectors that we need to do and the information that we need. So we're being outgunned. And that is a choice that we're making. We should not do that. And this committee can make a difference now to help us do better. That's what I'm trying to say.
Merci, M. Appleton. On s'élève encore à
Thank
30 000.
you, Mr. Appleton. We're still at the 60,000 feet view, and I wonder whether this predictability that we had for such a long time, things went well for a long time, has that predictability disappeared for the next 10 or 15 years? So do we need to learn with this unpredictability today and still continue to move forward, do you think?
Mr. Lavoie, you need to invite me back to the committee. I gave a wonderful speech to the City Bar of New York on this topic last March. Look, the rule of law has been replaced with the rule of whim. I don't have a good word in French for that. I'll leave it to the translators. At the end of the day, we can't predict the weather and we can't predict what's going to take place. Everything is based on a tweet on Truth Social. Our problem is we need to understand it's about leverage. It's about a different type of policy and a different type of approach. And we're still playing the old game. And that's where I differ with the Honorable Minister, because he's doing a job working on the old game. And I understand why, but we also must at the same time be preparing a strategy for the new game. And I fear we are not doing that. And I especially fear that we're missing out on the innovation economy, which is at the heart of our economy today across this country. And I fear that we will lose that because we're not prepared for that. And that would be a terrible tragedy.
Okay, thank you very much. Mr. Savard-Tremblay, 2 minutes.
Alors, en 2 minutes, parfait.
2 minutes, perfect. Well, Mr. Appleton, I'd like to continue the earlier discussion. You were talking about consultation mechanisms. Do you think there's other things that should be put in place to ensure transparency?
Yes, absolutely. I think that the level of consultation that we have is insufficient and it is inadequate. I think that we should be having much more significant information from the government about what they're looking for. I think we should have proposals from the government to make more meaningful consultation. You can have consultation and you can have meaningful consultation. I think we have some consultation, but we don't have meaningful. And I think we should be engaging more with members of parliament, the members of this committee in the process, and with the provinces, plus with civil society groups as well. And that's one of the factors that would be taken up by strategic advisory groups, but not the only one. So I think there should be more, not less. And I think it's essential on the government to do that because we are in a battle and we need to consult with Canadians more because of the battle, not less.
50 seconds remaining. We'll move on to our next panel. Right. Are we okay here? It's difficult. The information is so important, but we have our next panel. If we want to squeeze 2 minutes off of the other panel, we'll do 2 minutes for you and 2 minutes for Peter. Okay.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Since we don't have a lot of time, this committee makes recommendations to the government, so I'm going to ask a couple quick questions. Ms. Payne, would you recommend that the government remove tariffs on Chinese electric vehicles?
No.
Okay. Mr. Appleton, you would recommend, I take it, the reintroduction of some version of the modernized version of CIIT, is that correct?
Yes.
Ms. Bednar, you mentioned that sometimes there could be or some version of capture. in negotiations or the submissions process or the consultations. Would you recommend more transparency on the submissions that the government receives from industry associations and private sector participants?
Yes.
Okay. Thank you very much. Thanks, Mr. Chair.
Thank you, Madam Chair, and thank you to our witnesses for your bold testimony that we've heard here today. You know, like you have all said, that this is like no other negotiation that we've ever seen before. This is extraordinary what is happening. I want to thank Ms. Payne and Mr. DeCaro and others here just for standing up for Canadians. And when I say Canadians, standing up for labor, for our workers. You know, our approach has been one of a Team Canada approach. It's labor, it's business, it's government, it's all levels of government. You brought up municipal, provincial, federal working together. This is the approach we've taken. It has worked well for us in the past. What tweaks, what changes need to be made for this strategy to have a bigger impact and to get us the results that we're looking for? So what approach are you looking for? I'll direct this to Ms. Payne so we can get the best deal for Canada and Canadians.
Well, I think you've heard it here all day. You heard it from the professor. You heard it from me that we do need to have a coordinated strategy. We do need tables where that happens, and it has to be meaningful and real. And while I, as president of a powerful union, might be able to get my point of view across, that doesn't mean that everybody can. And so we need to make sure that we're creating the structures and the spaces in order to have the best information that we can possibly accumulate to help our negotiators. Because we don't know what we don't know. And there is a lot of information out there that I believe can help, a lot of intel, and that will help us be more strategic in what it is that we're trying to achieve. And also making sure people are in the loop as much as we can. Absolutely has to happen. And industry, labor, government, obviously all of us academics working together to get what can be a very good result for Canada.
Thank you.
Okay. Well, thank you so much to all our witnesses. Very valuable information. I will suspend momentarily if the witnesses can leave the table so the new witnesses can come to the table, please. Thank you. Thank you. Back to order. We have with us now for the remaining hour as an individual Anna Zalek, professor at York University by video conference, and from the Canadian Vehicle Manufacturers Association, again, Brian Kingston, President and Chief Executive Officer. We're glad to have you here, especially today. And from Linamar Corporation, Linda Hasenfratz, Executive Chair. Welcome to both of you for being with us today. We appreciate that very much. I think we're still trying to get are you connected? Yeah. Okay. Professor Zalek, would you like to go first, please, for opening comments for up to 5 minutes?
Okay, thank you very much. Thank you very much to the chair, the committee, for the invitation to present insights here, and the clerks and technological staff for their assistance. I'm a professor at York University in Toronto, and over the past 20 years, my research has concerned the geopolitics of the oil industry with extensive field research in oil-producing regions in Mexico, Nigeria, and Western Canada. I'm originally from Alberta, studied at the University of Alberta, and subsequently at Cornell University, New York State, and was a postdoc at the University of California, Berkeley, before assuming full-time position at York University in 2007. Over the last decade and a half, a significant part of my research has concerned Canadian investment in the restructured Mexican energy sector. A restructuring brought about by the 2013 constitutional reform in Mexico. I presented at this committee in June 2024 at the end of the Mexican leg of a course on the CUSMA agreement, but the continental dynamics have changed considerably in that 1.5 year period, clearly, and some of the cautions I suggested then with regard to Mexican energy sovereignty now apply equally to Canada, if not more so, and I think you've heard some similar cautions from previous speakers. Given the nature of the times, it is also essential, I think, to be far more explicit today than I was in my previous remarks, as the rule of law, internationally and increasingly domestically in our southern neighbor, the United States, is withering away alongside diplomatic norms. While then I recommended extending the rapid response mechanism and labor provisions of the CUSMA to Canada and the United States, and I also suggested raising the bar on environmental protections across the 3 CUSMA borders, and I suggested raising the bar on changing practices to ensure that states like Canada were protected from litigation should they seek to implement more stringent climate policy. I also called for ridding the CUSMA agreement of the vestiges of investor-state arbitration as applies to the Mexican energy sector, and noted that the Coalition of Trade Ministers on Climate have called for similar measures. Now, while I still would agree with these matters today, I frankly no longer see a rushed renegotiation of this agreement, and granted at the time I also had concerns, but I certainly do not now consider it to be in Canada's interest. As I imagine you know, on Friday, the United States scuttled the International Maritime Organization agreement aimed at reducing emissions in the shipping sector, and they did so reportedly in the most undiplomatic of forms. Trump has implemented tariffs on Canadian goods under Section 232 that I know that you will have heard from Unifor, and tariffs under the IEEPA. The latter have been formally struck down as illegal, as I imagine you know, in U.S. federal courts. Trump is appealing this to Supreme Court, but the Section 232 tariffs have already had devastating consequences for Canadian jobs in the steel and automotive sector. Our government seems to be caving on all manner of issues to Trump's agenda, most egregious ones including the border security bill that may violate Canada's Charter of Rights and Freedoms, and rescinding the digital services tax, something negotiating tactic in this CUSMA renegotiation. I'm particularly concerned with the apparent closed-door negotiations on energy, including the Keystone XL pipeline, which Toronto Star journalist recently described as the zombie pipeline, and that it seems to be able to rise from the dead. The current government seems to be employing this as a strategy to appease the U.S. president. TC Energy, formerly TransCanada, has described itself for some years as the single largest Canadian investor in Mexico, but it has also established major offices in Houston, Texas, and 2 of its senior executives there, who I believe are married, have traded off positions as senior advisors to Trump in the first and now the second Trump presidency. TC Energy has built much of the infrastructure that has led to the reversal of Mexican energy sovereignty so that the country is now dependent on U.S. fracked gas to feed its electrical grid. And the implications of this gas for the actual greening of emissions are dubious at best and have not been thoroughly studied. Despite Trump's calling out critically that Canada is a net exporter of energy to the United States, the Keystone XL pipeline may be welcome because the U.S. Gulf refineries have spare capacity to process Canadian bitumen and Mexican heavy oil, and transporting these fuels to the American oil heartland would boost American petrochemical jobs, use their fixed capital, and retain value added in the United States, rather than allowing for the creation of Canadian jobs through processing these hydrocarbons at home. So, Canadian Mexican hydrocarbon exports to the U.S. remain geostrategic for the U.S. And I'm a proponent of looking toward a future beyond oil and gas. But even if I were not, the construction of the Keystone XL pipeline or further pipelines connecting the United States to our energy grid reduces our national options for how to allocate our hydrocarbon resources. And we must avoid any agreement around energy that involves Canada committing to either export more bitumen or import hydrocarbons, notably fracked gas and shale oil from the United States. Either of these would decrease our options to build non-hydrocarbon electricity systems and climate-friendly infrastructure, and our ability to create protected Canadian jobs in a modern green energy sector, which is something that other parts of the world are leading in. Finally, I feel compelled, given this is the Standing Committee on International Trade, to comment that as a member of the Jewish Faculty Network, I must state that it is incumbent on the committee to cancel the Canada-Israel Free Trade Agreement until Israel respects the civil rights of Palestinians as guaranteed under international law.
Thank you. Thank you, Professor. I'm so sorry, but you're like a minute and a half over. And, the members have a lot of questions, so I have to try to keep the speakers confined to the 5 minutes. But thank you so much. Okay, Mr. Kingston, again, up to 5 minutes. I'll cut you off then for the members to have time for their questions.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Honorable members, thank you for having me here again today as part of your study on the CUSMA review. Since the Auto Pact of 1965, as we discussed last time, Canada has reaped enormous economic and social benefits by being part of the integrated North American auto sector. Through common regulations, competitive supports, and most importantly, duty-free trade, we've been able to manufacture and sell into a market that's accounting for annual sales of nearly 20 million vehicles. And so just last year, Canada exported about $46.5 billion in vehicles, 92% of that went to the United States. So it is the CUSMA that's really the foundation for the integrated industry that we have today, and that agreement provides certainty. It reinforces the long-established integration of the auto industry's supply chain that is necessary for manufacturers to compete globally, and it facilitates the regulatory alignment of vehicle technical regulations with the United States. So with this upcoming review of CUSMA, we must do everything possible to first renew the agreement and restore certainty for companies that make long-term investment decisions. We have to protect our preferential access into the United States and ultimately support this integrated supply chain. And so we've identified 3 priorities for your consideration here today as we prepare for this CUSMA review. The first is obvious. We must remove the Section 232 tariffs on the automotive industry and Canada's retaliatory measures. They are doing enormous damage. And right now, through the first 10 months of the year, automakers have paid $10.6 billion US in tariffs on parts and vehicles that are imported into the United States from Canada and Mexico. That doesn't include steel and aluminum, so the numbers get higher and higher when you look at all the other U.S. tariffs that affect the supply chain. And according to the Center for Automotive Research, that tariff bill is going to hit $188 billion US in the next 3 years. That's U.S. manufacturers building cars in the United States. So this will significantly weaken the competitiveness of the industry. And it's created this bizarre situation where right now it's more cost effective to build a car in Japan or Germany and send it into America than to build a car in America. So this has to be addressed. This has to be reversed. Number 2, eliminate the federal EV mandate. It won't surprise you to hear me say this. The EV mandate, the electric vehicle availability standard, prioritizes EV sales over the development of our supply chain. It's a direct challenge to our integration with the United States through CUSMA and our competitiveness as an auto manufacturing jurisdiction because it levies punitive costs on companies that don't achieve these arbitrary sales targets that the federal government has established. Under the regulation, the vehicles manufactured here today in Canada are actually being phased out of the Canadian market by that regulation, which just makes it's inexplicable that that policy would remain in place, particularly given the challenges we're facing. So it must be repealed before CUSMA review process commences. And last, number 3, we must align with the United States on the approach to China. We, as we mentioned when we appeared here last time, we are strongly supportive of what the government has done with respect to the China surtax order that levies a 100% tariff on Chinese manufactured EVs. If we are going to secure a trade agreement with the Americans, we simply cannot be out of step with them on China. And we think that the government should do even more. There should be efforts to ban certain Chinese connected vehicle software, again, aligned to what the U.S. has done, and strengthen trade policy and investment authorities to ensure that we can be more responsive to anti-subsidy investigations and any national security threats in the EV battery supply chain. Now, it goes without saying that regardless of the outcome of the CUSMA review, we also recommend that the federal government moves quickly to implement policies to enhance our tax and regulatory competitiveness. That are needed to secure both the existing automotive manufacturing footprint and research operations, but also to allow us to compete into the future. The government has implemented many helpful policies over the past few years, but in many instances, we've been very reactive to U.S. policy as opposed to proactively putting forward a framework to make Canada ultra competitive. So now's the time. Regardless of CUSMA, we need to do that. So thank you for the questions.
Thank you, Mr. Kings. Yes, on to Ms. Hasenfratz. Welcome to committee.
Thank you so much. It's great to be here. I agree with everything that Brian just said, so I thought he did a great job. I'd like to say at the outset just how important I think this agreement is to all 3 countries in North America. It has brought enormous economic prosperity, as Brian says, to all 3 countries, and I think it's really critical that we successfully renegotiate it. I do love the idea of encouraging Canadian business to grow more internationally. After all, we have free trade agreements with 56 countries around the world, 2/3 of the world's economy, so we have a great framework for that. However, we cannot not make a deal with the U.S. They're the biggest economy in the world. They're on our doorstep. We must come to an agreement with them. So I think that's important to know. I do think we're in a good position going into this negotiation because despite the things that the U.S. administration says, both Canada and the U.S. have a lot at stake and a lot of reliance on each other right now. We've got a pretty balanced trade relationship with the U.S., excluding energy. I'm sure you know that the U.S. actually sells more goods and services to Canada than we do to them. We're the only top 5 trading partner that they have a surplus of trade with. And that's got to matter. That's got to matter a lot. And I think it matters certainly to the governors. 36 American states have Canada as their number 1 customer. And I know that they're calling on Trump to get a deal done with their most important trading partner, Canada. And I do think it's super positive that Trump and Carney have a good relationship. I think that's the foundation of getting a deal done. Now, I think the absolute top priority right now should be getting an interim deal ahead of the renegotiation of the agreement to eliminate the 232 tariffs. We can't wait 6, 8, 9 months to get the tariffs on vehicles, metal, and metal derivative products, importantly, dealt with. They're creating an enormous amount of cost for, of course, for U.S. businesses and U.S. consumers, but also for Canadian companies who are faced with a decision. If you are the importer of record to take product into the U.S., do we just absorb that extra cost or do we pass it on to customers and potentially lose market share? You know, I look at inflation rate in the U.S. right now is so much higher than it is in Canada. It's like 50% higher, and it's growing faster. So that's got to be motivation for the U.S. to come to the table. I think too often the Canadians feel like we're the one who has everything to lose, and I think the U.S. has a lot to lose as well. I think one thing that's really critical to understand is that since the inclusion of the metal product derivatives, the 232 metal product derivatives, to those that are subject to tariff, the impact of the 2-3 tariffs has spread dramatically. So you hear a lot the number 85% thrown around of 85% of exports into the U.S. are going tariff-free. That is no longer the case. There is more than 900 product categories that are deemed to include steel and aluminum, and that's only round 2 of 4 consultations in the U.S. So that's only going to grow. So please be aware that the impact is much, much more broad. Of course, the next priority is to renegotiate the broader agreement when that comes up. Now, I mentioned a minute ago, there's a lot at stake when it comes to trade agreements with the U.S., and that nowhere is that more true, as you've just heard, than in the automotive industry, which, of course, is a key focus of Linamar. It's more than 70% of our sales. And I'm sure you've also heard many times about the highly integrated nature of the supply chain in North America, which is really critical to our cost competitiveness. It's a big part of why trading agreements get put in place, right? So that we can consolidate our requirements and become experts at making higher volume product. In North America, as noted, the supply chain is very integrated. Parts are crossing the border, as I'm sure you've heard 6 or 7 times in some form or another. I'll give you one example from Linamar. We have a casting we make in Mexico. We ship it up to Canada. We machine it. We bring it on into another location in Canada where we assemble it with other parts that we're bringing from the U.S. That bigger assembly then goes down to the U.S., goes into a transmission. That transmission comes back to Canada, gets put into a car, and some of those cars go back into the U.S. as well. So lots of border crossings. President Trump says all those border crossings are inefficient, but that couldn't be farther from the truth, because all of this activity is actually happening within a very small radius of a couple of hundred miles. The fact that there's a border in between is irrelevant. You know, we've had free trade with the U.S. since 1965. So we're all very reliant on each other. You know, the U.S. has so much at stake right now. Most vehicles built in North America have 40 to 50% North American content. They make by far the most vehicles in North America. So as costs go up, as you heard, billions of dollars that are going to translate into higher consumer prices, we're going to see volumes go down, and that's going to hurt all of us.
Ms. Hasselblatt, I'm so sorry, but I have to,
problem.
because the members have so many questions, and it's always a balance. Mr. McKenzie, please, for 6 minutes.
Thank you very much. I greatly appreciate the witnesses' time here today and the opportunity to ask some questions of you. Ms. Hasenfratz, you're perhaps one of the few in this room who is on a private sector paycheck. Can you describe what efforts you're able to make in the course of your business, reaching across the border? There must be as many interested suppliers and business partners in your success and the continued relationship on the U.S. side of the border as there are here in Canada.
Well, of course, we have many suppliers and customers, of course, in the U.S., all of whom are equally motivated to see things get back to a lower cost kind of platform. I think the problem is in the U.S. there's a hesitancy to raise their hand and highlight that they're feeling pain and that this is a difficult situation for them. But I think as time goes on and that pain continues to build, that it will become more and more of an imperative to deal with the situation.
Are you sensing that? Are your American partners speaking to their representatives and elected officials about?
Yes, I believe they are. I think that they're reluctant to do so in a very public way, but I believe they are doing so in a more private way where they can try and get their point across. I think with time, as these costs, as noted, billions of dollars that are being impacted just in the automotive industry, starts to take its toll on an already difficult situation. I mean, if I look at vehicle production levels in North America today compared to before COVID, we're down about 10 to 15%. So that's got nothing to do with tariffs. That was, other factors that are impacting vehicle production levels. And then when you layer onto that the enormous cost of the tariffs, we're seeing an enormous amount of supplier distress in the U.S. I mean, it's an opportunity, frankly, for us to take over work from those companies or even potentially acquire them, which we've recently done. But that kind of distress, when it builds up in the industry, does start to take its toll on the overall production, because you need every piece to make that car. And if somebody goes down and you can't retool quickly, it's a problem.
We're about to face more of, I suspect. Can I ask you about, without revealing any sensitive information respecting your company, are you underway with efforts to export more substantially outside of the U.S.?
Well, our strategy at Linamar has always been to produce in the continent in which our customers reside. So we make product in North America for customers in North America. We make product in Europe for customers in Europe, and we make product in China or Asia for customers in Asia. So we don't do a lot of shipping back and forth to other countries, not with our automotive components, where the volumes are a lot higher. With some of our industrial products, yes, we are supplying other countries, and that has been a big initiative for our agricultural business and our Skyjack business to increase our international sales, and we've been growing our market share accordingly.
And I'm going to ask this question to yourself first, but then also to our other two witnesses. What's number one on your list for this government to pursue in respect of a trading relationship with the U.S.?
I mean, as noted, number one in my mind is to get rid of the 232 tariffs, not just on metal and metal derivatives, which obviously are the bits that are impacting me, but also on the vehicles, because I think that having a healthy vehicle assembly presence in Canada is critical to our economy. There's 6 or 7 jobs for every OEM assembly job, automaker assembly job. There's 6 or 7 jobs that are created to support that. So I feel a little bit worried that there's a tone that is shifting away from the importance of vehicle assembly, and I do want to emphasize how critical it is that we keep that, not just for those assembly jobs, but for the 6 or 7 other jobs. The impact on Canada economically would be felt for generations if we decide we're going to abandon vehicle assembly. We absolutely should not do that.
Thank you. Mr. Kingston, same question. Top of your list.
I fully agree with what Linda has said and would have the same recommendation, removal of the 232 tariffs.
Ms. Zalick?
I think we should look at an agreement that raises the bar on labor and environmental standards across all 3 countries. This is something that the first Trump administration was quite interested in. But as I've already noted, I think our time would be better spent in negotiations, bilateral negotiations with Mexico and with other trading partners than negotiating at this moment with a very unpredictable U.S. administration. Thanks.
Point well taken. I think I just have about 30 seconds, Ms. Chairman. I want to ask about the EV mandate. Mr. Kingston, I think you've indicated quite clearly you believe that should be something that's eliminated. It is not something I've heard very much from with respect to this government. I live in Western Canada. We have great distances. Ms. Hasenfratz referred to the short circumference of the trading or manufacturing area for automotive vehicles, but we go long distances on a regular basis. Have you had any experience directly with business people in Western Canada to talk about that EV mandate and its impracticalities?
Yes, regularly. And using the government's own estimates, we needed 100,000 chargers to be installed this year to meet the government's mandated targets. There's 35,000. So the gap is massive, and it grows every single year. And so to address the concerns that people have in Western Canada and rural Canada and Northern Canada, you need massive amounts of infrastructure, and we're not building at nearly the pace to address that concern.
Okay. Thank you very much. Mr. Navdi, for 6 minutes, please.
Thanks, Chair. I'm going to share my time initially with MP O'Rourke, please.
A very quick. Ms. Hasenfratz, you were at the Industry Committee this morning, and Linamar is a Guelph, a Canadian, a global success story. You described the strength of the sector this morning, the productivity that exists in the sector. And as we engage in our current negotiations and as we prepare for our renegotiation of CUSMA, what should we know in order to negotiate from a position of strength and confidence and with a united front?
Well, I talked this morning about all the things that I think Canada has to offer right now and that we should be feeling pretty good about. I think that we do a good job of telling ourselves how bad we are all the time, when in fact that's often not the case. I talked this morning at the Productivity Committee about the very strong productivity that we see in the manufacturing sector in Canada, which, by the way, has been growing productivity at twice the rate of the U.S. over the last 15 years. Since 2010, it has grown 13% compared to the U.S. growing 6%, more than double the level of productivity growth. When I look at our own organization, we have 75 plants around the world, 29 of them are in Canada. Our most productive facilities by far are in Canada. It is where the vast majority of our investment is going. More than half, we're well under half of our plants are in Canada, but well over half of our investment this year in 2025, is in Canada, in our Canadian plants, with our strong, deep teams who have the ability to improve every day like no other plant of ours around the world. And I think it is important for us all to understand that, because it's not just us that's like that. Many people in the manufacturing sector, writ more broadly, and certainly in the automotive sector, where we have drummed into us the need for lean manufacturing, continuous improvement. We have to give 2% price reductions to our customers every single year. Every year, we give 2% back to our customers. Even with that, over the last 10 years, between 2014 and 2024, Linamar increased our productivity, our value-added sales per employee, by 54%. 54% increase, even after we gave 2% back to our customers every single year. That's the kind of productivity that we have in Canada. And I think it's something we should all feel really proud of and know that we have a base that we can build on internationally.
Thank you very much. How much time we've got, Chair? 3 minutes. So thank you to all the presenters. Really important conversation. The panel before you also obviously was, I hear the lament in everybody's voice that we had such a great trading relationship with the Americans, and it's all in disarray, and we're all trying to salvage it as we move forward. And we will do that, of course. I'm of the view that the relationship has structurally changed. Not just for this administration, but beyond. And of course, we have to manage that. But I also wanted to get your thought on looking forward. What are the opportunity lies for Canada and Canadian manufacturers, whether it's in auto and other sectors, when it comes to other parts of the world? Because I think it is extremely important that we look beyond just our relationship with the United States and to see how well we can do other places. Can I maybe start with Ms. Hasenfratz from you, your thoughts as to what Canada needs to do, beside, of course, reestablishing or managing our relationship with the Americans in other places that will help Canadian industries, Canadian workers?
I think a couple things. I mean, one, for sure, we've got the framework already in place, right? As I mentioned earlier, 56 free trade agreements, representing 2/3 of the globe's economy. So we already have the ability to trade freely with the vast majority of the world. People say globalization is dead. Globalization's only dead in the U.S. The rest of us have the opportunity to trade wherever we want. And we have a huge opportunity in Canada with the agreements we already have in place to lever that. I think to help Canadian businesses grow abroad, one of the key things that our government should do is start talking a little more positively about some of the things I've already talked about the great productivity that we have in our manufacturing sector, about the fantastic technology companies that we have here. That intersection of this strong manufacturing capability with our incredible tech sector that is now being called advanced manufacturing is incredible. You know, we've got this nexus of AI capability in our country. I mean, AI started here. The godfathers of AI are Canadian. You know, this ecosystem has grown up from that. All these startup companies, little companies with all these great technologies that we and many other companies have used to implement AI and productivity enhancing technologies. You know, we've got that here. Like, that's an incredible asset, and not just AI, but in all areas of tech. We have the second highest density of technology startups in the world, next to Silicon Valley. Like, the capabilities here are fantastic, not to mention the critical minerals, fresh water, clean electricity, more than almost any country in the world. Like, we've got such a great story to tell, and we're not telling it. And when we start telling Canadians, you're not productive, you know, that's not very, that doesn't create a lot of incentive. Like, if you're coaching a team, you don't tell all the players, you know what, you are all really bad. You're not very good. Like, let's talk about what is good and build on our strengths. That's what's going to attract investment in here and help us to expand internationally as well.
Possibly you could come back once a week and just remind us of all the positives that we can build on. Thank you so much for that. Yes, Simone Tremblay, please, for 6 minutes.
Merci, Madame la Présidente. Merci à l'ensemble des...
Thank you, Madam Chair, and thank you to all the witnesses. Ms. Zellick, I thought it was interesting when you raised an idea that you weren't able to develop fully, and I'm going to give you an opportunity to come back to this. Because, correct me if I'm mistaken, but you were talking about a tariff system that would be based on the social and environmental costs related to goods. And I suppose it would be applied on a geographic basis across North America. Correct me if I'm mistaken, and perhaps you could tell us more about that.
Thank you very much. Yes, indeed. My concluding comments were directed at what you're referencing, which is that we need to look at an integrated system internationally and particularly with Mexico in the current moment, but one that is based on long-term planning, on the interests in the longer term of all of the residents of Canada. So this involves thinking through an energetic and economic system that is coordinated. And one of the problems in our energy system right now is that it is often dictated by short-term contracts. Certainly at this moment, it's dictated by trying to appease, the plutocrats south of the border. But rather, in order to create an energy transition, we need to be thinking in the longer term, and we need to be coordinating a slow movement off of hydrocarbons to renewable energy systems. So I think through, bringing together the minds in the world that are wanting to change our energy system to create more just outcomes socially and environmentally, we can seek out different kinds of agreements. As I mentioned earlier, I think one of the surprising outcomes of the last CUSMA negotiation was the fact that Mexican labor standards were improved, that it was incumbent upon that, that was one of the things that Trump insisted upon. Well, let's learn from that and try to raise the regulatory bar in bilateral negotiations and in international negotiations so that we start addressing some of the deeper crises that we're facing internationally, which includes ecological crisis, which includes a financial system that is insufficiently regulated, and which includes looking at the digital economy, as was just referenced by the last speaker, and re-implementing or considering the implementation of the digital services tax that would allow us to then take those resources and invest them in a clean technology industry within Canada.
Tout à fait d'accord avec vous, mais...
Yes, I absolutely agree with you. So, do you believe that CUSMA, do you think that employment standards are well protected? There was this willingness to go further, and if we can do better, how could we do that?
So one of the suggestions would be the extension of the rapid response mechanism that currently applies in Mexico across the continent that would allow for complaints to be made when labor protections are not being respected in the other CUSMA partner countries. And a similar kind of system could be put in place that would have more teeth to it than what is allowed under the Commission for Environmental Cooperation at the continental level. I've heard many evaluations of the current rapid response mechanisms implementation in Mexico, and most of them point at the need to make it more robust and for it to be significant also continentally. Clearly there are labor violations within Canada that also need to be examined, and this would help us to protect our own workers as well.
On sait que il y avait dans la...
We know that in NAFTA, this very much contributed, in fact, to going towards this investor-state dispute settlement mechanism, which meant that there was sovereignty of multinationals who could actually dismantle democratically adopted rules that were working for more solidarity, justice, and more environment and more labour standards and consumer protection, all of that in the name of profit for certain corporations. Fortunately, CUSMA actually removed that mechanism, but Canada's formal position is that it would still be favourable to have the ISD. Do you think it should be brought into the agreement or left aside?
It should absolutely be left aside, and that removal of investor-state arbitration should also hold for Mexico. I think what we're basically doing right now is meeting the needs primarily of a couple of large firms, one of them being TC Energy that I mentioned, that is now equally a U.S. firm as it is a Canadian, and their investments in Mexico. And I think we need to be learning from what Mexico has done over the last 10 years, which is building infrastructure over which they have more control. So, yes, I think we have to remove ourselves from all trade agreements that allow for firms to take states to court when they try to implement multilateral environmental agreements, including the Paris Agreement.
Thank you very much. On to Mr. Mantle, please, for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Thank you to our witnesses for appearing. My questions initially will be to you, Ms. Hassan-Fratz. First, my thanks for you for appearing. It's important that we hear directly from Canadian companies on this upcoming review. I understand that you were in the process of building a parts facility in Welland, in Ontario, a gigacasting facility, as I understand it's called, but that has now halted. That factory will no longer open, and it's in fact up for sale, as I understand. Can you just tell us what happened there?
Yeah, absolutely. We still are big believers in the gigacasting technology. We were actually the first in North America to invest in gigacasting technology. It's reasonably new technology that is being utilized in the industry. We had been awarded a major program for that facility, which quite unfortunately, because it was for a battery electric vehicle and the sort of collapse of expected demand in battery electric vehicles was unfortunately canceled. So we found ourselves without a project for our brand new, beautiful facility. Of course, we are actively looking for alternative projects. The problem is with that type of technology, it is typically a 2 to 3 or even 5 year time frame between when you can start discussions with somebody and when you're actually going to be able to start production. So we've had to sort of close things up to wait for those opportunities to manifest. But we are actively looking at alternative uses for that building. It is a beautiful state-of-the-art facility. We are exploring if there's somebody interested in purchasing it. We may discuss that. I would 100 times rather put some work into it. And we do have a couple of pretty interesting opportunities that we're talking about right now that hopefully we can use that facility for.
Thanks. I just wanted to get some color on some of those reports. about that facility. I understand that that facility was included in your application and receipt of funding under the Strategic Innovation Fund, the CIF. In fact, that funding, at least publicly, was tied to your 4 facilities in Ontario, one of them being that Welland facility. Can you tell us how much of that funding was tied to that Welland facility?
Yeah, we have not applied for any money for Welland, just given the circumstances. So although we're claiming funding under that program for other investments that we've made in the other facilities, there's nothing that's been claimed for Welland or paid, obviously.
I'm clear then, the public announcement by the government on January 28th that this money was going to, in part, the Welland Fund is incorrect?
It's not incorrect. It was included in it, but because of the subsequent situation that evolved, we did not put any claim forward for any of the investment for Welland. So the way that it works, we identify a series of projects that would come under the SIF funding, and then as we spend, we claim. But given the circumstances, we haven't claimed anything. So there is a claim potential, but it hasn't been touched.
Yeah, sorry to cut you off. I'm getting closer to my time, so I just have a few more questions I want to get in on this. It had been discussed that that project on the CIF funding would have resulted in 2,000 jobs in Canada across those 4 facilities. What's the number now?
We, obviously that wasn't just Welland. That was all of these other investments that are still underway. So, we're marching towards it. I don't have a number for you right now. Obviously, we've been impacted by this overall slowdown in the industry as well. So that's hurting the numbers, but we do feel confident in our ability to get there over time. I mean, we're definitely growing our employee base in Canada.
A few seconds left, so I've
sorry.
got 2 more questions I want to ask you if I can get them in. So did you provide any assurances to the government that you would meet those job targets for that SIF funding? And are you going to meet those commitments now that one of those facilities is no longer on the table?
Yeah, I mean, as I say, we did make a commitment around jobs, and we do feel confident in our ability to get there over time.
And last couple questions here. You mentioned that it's top for you for Linamar to get a deal on the sectoral tariffs on autos, steel, and aluminum. So is it fair to say that if we don't get a deal on steel, aluminum, and autos, then that's a failure of this process in your mind for Linamar?
What do you mean a failure of? I mean, I think it must be a priority to deal with this massive impact. So,
but I'm not talking about hopes. I'm talking about results. So if we don't get a deal,
Just a short answer, please. I'm sorry, because we're over time.
I mean, I think it would be a setback, and should absolutely be pursued.
Mr. Fonseca, please, for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Madam Chair, and I want to thank the witnesses, all the witnesses that we've had here today in our first panel and our second panel, just the optimism and the hope and the looking always for solutions and a can-do attitude. So I want to thank you for that. I wish we could bottle up what you had to say, Ms. Hasenfratz, about advanced manufacturing, about productivity, about our economy, about being bold on Canada, and we should give that to the Blue Jays today, and go Jays go. Hopefully they win tonight, but also right across Canada, because the approach that we've been taking as a government is a Team Canada approach, and we feel this is the only way to win. So it's working with business, working with labor, with government, all levels of government, as you said, the Ontario government here in this case, but municipal, provincial, federal governments working together to be able to achieve. So one of the things, when these unjustified 232 tariffs came in, and I know they're your top priority that we need to address, the first thing that the government did was to address those allegations about the border, et cetera. We invested in the border. We have put many resources into. We have communicated this to the Trump administration. We continue to do so, and to get relief and to get rid of those 232 tariffs. I want to ask, what else? What would you suggest in terms of a further approach to getting rid of those 232 tariffs, to making the U.S. administration understand how they're hurting not only Canada, but they're hurting the United States, hurting workers, hurting their economy, and of course hurting ours?
I mean, I think that there's definitely levers that we could pull in order to get an agreement to lift the 232 tariffs on not just metals, but also vehicles. For instance, we could increase regional value content. You know, it's at 75%. At the moment, we could see that we could increase that. We could impose a U.S. content requirement on vehicles. I mean, we need to, you know, Donald Trump is a deal maker. He wants to make a deal. So you need to go in and make a deal, right? So there's things that we offer, there's things that he offers. And, you know, in the end, he wants to be a winner. And if he's a winner, like, we're a winner too, okay? Because if we get rid of these tariffs and we're able to continue to make vehicles tariff-free and continue to respect the NAFTA USMCA CUSMA agreement, whatever you want to call it, then I think that's a good thing for all of us. So let's get in there and make a deal.
And Mr. Kingston, on the same question.
Yeah, I remain an optimist on this, that there's a deal to be had for three reasons. First of all, the U.S. has a trade surplus with us in auto, not the same story with a lot of other countries. Secondly, we're their top export destination for finished vehicles, and it's not even close. More cars come to Canada than Germany, Mexico, and China combined. And thirdly, China alignment. We have aligned with the Americans on China. And they ultimately will need us. I just came from Saguenay, where I was visiting Rio Tinto. We have the ability to process gallium. China has choked off supply of rare earth minerals. They have 90% control of these minerals around the world. And where do we actually happen to have almost all of them? Right here in Canada, but we haven't done anything to process and mine these minerals. So we have what they need, but we have to move faster to build some leverage.
Okay, and we heard from previous witnesses just about that we are in an economic war, right? And they brought forward to create a war room. So we do have our negotiators. They've been down in Washington. They continue to work, you know, tirelessly to getting a deal. What are your thoughts on a war room type of approach to our CUSMA review? Yeah, sure.
I think it's a great idea. I mean, I think there should be very fluid and active participation of business and industry in these discussions. So, you know, nobody knows better than the folks who are running businesses how all of this impacts them. It's like when we do cost-saving work with our plants, we always involve the operators on the floor because nobody knows better than them, you know, how to do the work that they're doing. They're the ones with the best ideas. So you absolutely should use business and industry.
Yeah. Having been through the first CUSMA negotiation, the government had established pretty clear consultative mechanisms with industry, hugely important and very effective.
Very much. Thank you to our witnesses. We really appreciate your information. We're all in this together, and we appreciate your excellent comments to all three of our witnesses on this panel and the previous. Thank you very much. You're welcome to leave. The committee has a bit of housekeeping to do that could take a couple of minutes. One is approval of our budget for this CUSMA study. It was circulated on Friday. Any objections? All those in approval. And I believe we were talking a bit as far as the vice chairs about possible travel and discussions about that. Mr. Navsky?
Yes, Chair, thank you very much. I think you probably would need a motion from us, and Mr. Chambers and Mr. Savard Tamble and I've been in conversation, and I've shared a motion with them. I can read it on the record to see if there's any comments back, but I think it captures both travel in terms of CUSMA study that we're doing and also trade diversification relating to Mercosur. So I have it both English and French, but I'll read the English version right now. That in relation to its study on the subject matter of the upcoming CUSMA review and trade diversification, the committee clerk bring forward a plan for 6 members of the Standing Committee on International Trade to travel to Washington, D.C. and Detroit, Michigan in 2026 with a focus on the upcoming CUSMA review, and Brasilia, Brazil, and Buenos Aires, Argentina in 2026 with a focus on the efforts to advance trade negotiations with the Mercosur Trade Group, and that the necessary staff accompany the committee. So that's sort of the essence of the motion. If this committee approves it, then I'm sure it goes to a coordination committee and the whips, and then they can perhaps decide, of course, time frame, sitting week, non-sitting week, etc., which is out of our hands.
It's a direction for the clerk to start to look at putting that together, which is a fair amount of time, and then come back to the committee for further discussions on it. So everybody's okay with that? Okay? All right. Thank you all very much. I got to throw something out. Can I throw out an idea? Yeah, the motion's fine. Everybody's good with it. But, you know, you hear these. Okay, we're actually, okay. Yeah. I'm wondering if we would have had, no, but we're listening to these businesses. What if we had the head of the major softwood, auto, aluminum, and so on, the head of those 4 major industries come in for a 2-hour session with the committee? I mean, I don't know if they'll come, but I just wonder if that would be helpful. Like, we keep hearing from a lot of businesses, but what if we actually had the heads of those 4 industries come before committee? Sir Savar Tremblay?
I wanted to talk about my most recent discussions with the forestry sector. They're fearful about public meetings because everything that's said publicly is monitored by those who are the decision makers on the other side of the border. So they prefer to have an in-camera meeting so that we could speak freely.
Well, I tossed that out there. Let's think about it, and we'll have another conversation about it. Yes? Yes, sir?
Chair, are you suggesting the heads of trade associations from those 4 sectors, or you're thinking actually the companies and their CEOs, etc.?
The major heads of those companies. So I throw it out there. We can talk about it on Thursday or talk about it offline if you think it's a good idea to try to move forward our whole agenda. It might be helpful. I don't know. And we'll have a further discussion, okay? Thank you all very much. Move adjournment.